Hey guys, Sorin here. So this is a long one. Today we're talking about web hosting and the basic stuff of web hosting in 2020. This video is aimed at the less tech savvy people and guys or business owners who just want to make their first website, their first blog, or have it done by someone. I hope this video will help you understand why you need hosting, what is hosting, how many types of hostings exist, as well as give you some basic pointers on what to look for, so you know you won't get ripped off or buy something that is not that useful for your use case scenario. So let's dive right in. What's hosting? The process of holding a website online by a PC or a server is called hosting. So a host is something that holds the website or your store online. Why do we need hosting? I mean, I could just host that store myself or that website or my blog, right? Well, you can. You definitely can. You need a bit of information and tech guidance, but there are 1,000 tutorials online on how you can do this by yourself. But I wouldn't. I mean, not if you're serious. Of course you can do this to try and test stuff and just use it for learning. But if you want something serious, something that people should and would visit at any time of the day, week, month, year, whatever, you should get a hosting plan. Why? Even the cheapest cheapo plans, the cheapest web hosting company, advertises 99.9% uptime. That means that your website will be offline about 43 minutes per month, tops. And it usually isn't applicable anyway. I mean, it rarely happens that your website goes offline because the infrastructure is quite reliable nowadays. We've come a long way from the early days of the internet. Besides this, take into account power outages. Do you have a UPS? Great. But if your whole street loses power, will you still have an internet connection? I doubt it. So, hardware maintenance. I mean, if your PC gets broken and you host your website yourself, you're gonna have to deal with that. While you deal with that, most probably your website or blog or store or whatever will be offline. So it's not feasible. And the hardware to make something redundant is very, very expensive. So that's why you should rely on a dedicated host. Pay someone to host your website or blog or store or your application. Besides this, we need to talk about internet. Sure, your internet connection might be fast, but for example, 25 megabits of upload is not that much in terms of power when you're trying to host a blog that attracts a lot of traffic. Besides this, most residential connections have a dynamic IP. That means that every time your router or your ISP assigns a new IP, your router restarts, by the way, or your ISP assigns you a new IP, your IP changes. So you need to deal with that because your IP needs to be static in order to make that machine accessible by the internet. You don't have to worry about this with hosting. And a lot of hosting providers even offer dedicated IPs. That means that IP is your IP and yours only. That's pretty neat. So as you see, there are a lot of tumbles that we need to get over if you want to host something, especially if you want it to be hosted reliable in your own home or even in your own office, because the costs simply outweigh the pros. I mean, it will always be cheaper to just rent a server, and there are a lot of options as we shall see right now. So okay, you've decided that you shouldn't host it yourself, and your web project, be it a blog or a website, we'll just call it a project from now on, is going to be hosted somewhere. How many types of hosting plans are offered by these service providers? I'm not gonna advertise any company, I don't care about any of them. I'm just gonna tell you the types. And you should choose a company based on community reviews. Try Reddit, random forums online. You need to get real people's opinions, because marketing can be misleading, as it can always be. So the main types of hostings, packages, and service types are shared hosting, VPS hosting, cloud hosting, dedicated hosting, hybrids like WordPress hosting or Magento hosting, and reseller hosting. We're gonna take each of them one by one and explain the differences between them, when are they useful, why are they useful, and if it's worth it for what you get. So according to your budget and your requirements, you should choose your hosting based on what I'm about to explain. Always make a budget, even if you're just starting a blog. Make an acceptable budget per year, per month for this kind of expensive, the hosting, the domain. Because you need to find something that won't break the bank, is easily expandable when needed, and that will perform as per your needs. So if you're just starting out, you probably need something low powered. If you're already running and you need to upgrade, you're gonna need something better. You should talk with your developer or the team that handles your store or project. And if you're just starting out, be conservative, as you don't need a lot of horsepower to start. Let's dig in. Shared hosting. The term shared comes from the fact that there is one machine that runs multiple websites, and the resources of that machine is shared by all the websites. When I'm talking about resources, I'm talking about the CPU power and the RAM memory. Each website will have, according to its package and pricing, an amount of space, hopefully SSD. It's really the way to go, it's faster and everything else. So, what are the advantages of shared hosting? Shared hosting is very cheap. I mean very cheap. The disadvantage, of course, the advantage is that you get the uptime, that you don't have to mind the hardware, power outages. Your home can be without electricity and your website will still be online even in a shared hosting. It's independent of your location and everything you do. You just need to make sure you update the content, post your blogs or whatever. Now, the cons are the performance. Mind you, we're talking about the performance when you have some traffic, just some people online, on your blog, on your store, meddling around, and certain ugly scenarios that occur within shared hosting. Scenarios like a website that is hosted on the same server, you can't find this out. Only your host company, the one that provides you the hosting service, knows. But let's say one of the websites on the same server that yours is hosted on has a traffic spike. That could cause a slowdown for the other sites, including yours. And if the traffic is legitimate, it might even occur in the future, if that client refuses to upgrade its plan and the service provider, your hosting company, does not force him or at least indicate him to upgrade or do something about this issue. Now, these things are usually not that avoidable, but they can be sort of mitigated. And especially if you're starting something or you have a low amount of traffic, let's say you've just opened a blog, you don't need to go to higher tier pricing. Usually at least the first 6 months some shared hosting plan will be great. And in terms of how to choose them, the marketing is quite vague. Don't go for unlimited disk space or something like that. You're not going to need 100 gigabyte to hold a blog. Heck, not even a store, a pretty big store. But you will need a couple resources if you're trying to build a store or something more complex than a presentation website for your company or a blog. That's just how things work. E-commerce stores need more resources. That doesn't mean you can't run it on a shared hosting. At start, when you have no traffic, you can, and you can save some costs the first 6 months of first year, depending on how fast you think the traffic will grow. you can save some money by going to a shared option. Now, I would never choose the cheapest shared plan from any company. That's the cheapest cheap. Just go with something a bit higher, just in case. Maybe your store, your blog, your website will catch on and grab more traffic sooner than you think. It's good to be on the safe side. Apart from this, you just want a little extra speed always. Speed matters in SEO, and that's the truth. But you won't need a dedicated machine because you've just started a blog right now. I mean, that's a waste of money. But you shouldn't go for the cheapest option out there. This being said, we're gonna move to the other options, but I'm gonna come back to compare shared hosting with the other options. So the next option is a VPS, Virtual Private Server. This is different from the shared hosting in terms that you have dedicated resources, limited dedicated resources according to how much you pay. So when we've talked in the shared hosting, you have one server that hosts multiple websites. The same thing happens here, but the resources are not shared. So that server allocates a certain number of resources to each website. So if your VPS plan has, let's say, 2 GB of RAM and 1 CPU core, that's just yours. Nobody on that server will be able to use your memory, for example. So if you use it, if your website has traffic or not, you'll have that memory available. So that's a good thing, because that leads to better performance, and this comes with a higher pricing. Why? The explanation is simple. The same server can hold more shared websites than VPSs, because resources are allocated and are finite. Let's say the server your host has 256 GB. That's the limit. I mean, if they split that into VPS plans, there's a limit. But on shared hosting, as no guaranteed resources are offered and usually nothing is written or nothing dedicated is written, they can usually go much higher with how many websites they can host, so it's more profitable, sort of. But it's lower. So a VPS having dedicated resources is much faster. Mind you, there are these terms named managed. A managed VPS and a non-managed VPS. A managed VPS usually refers to the fact that the hosting company charges you a couple of bucks extra to take care of the operating system and everything. If you choose not to go the managed route, you'll have to set up the Linux distribution or Windows or whatever you decide to run, each server, each service, and everything else accordingly. So you'll waste a bit of time with this. If you know how to do this, you can save some money. If you don't, or don't have the time, you can just pay the host to manage your VPS. So a VPS is a great option if you're serious. I mean, if you're a business and opening a store and have quite a bit of budget, as a business should have, for hosting and online stuff, you would probably want to go with a VPS, because you'll probably have a marketing campaign, some traffic coming from Facebook, AdWords campaigns. So you want to make sure that while paying for the marketing stuff, your website will actually handle the traffic coming. I mean, it would be pointless to direct traffic, paid traffic, to your store, and your store will be slower, inaccessible, because you've chipped out on the shared hosting option. So VPS is the next step, basically, sometimes. If you're a bit tech savvy or know your way around the PC, when you see a VPS plan with 2 GB of RAM advertised, don't be fooled. You can do a lot of stuff with 2 GB of RAM. I mean, you can configure a WordPress installation, or your host can do it for you. You can configure that installation and the server to handle a lot of traffic, like a lot of traffic. So it's not just like on the PC. You don't need 16 GB of RAM for even medium-sized stuff. You just don't need it, because that's not how it works. We'll talk about this deeper in future videos if you're interested. The next thing we should talk about is something very popular nowadays, the term cloud hosting. You see different companies advertising cloud hosting nowadays, and it's sort of like a hybrid of a VPS solution, because it relies on many remote hosts or servers to host your content. When I mean content, I mean everything regarding your website: the database, the scripts, images, files, text, etc. So the cloud option is usually very reliable, and to be honest, I prefer it over a VPS most of the times, at least in the last couple of years, since it's gotten much more reliable because of the flexibility. So a cloud hosting company can offer you the option to use a lot more data centers. For example, you can have your website hosted on EU, on USA, and on different points. And based on where your customers or visitors for a blog are, that matters when we're talking about speed. And the other thing, the flexibility. As funny as it sounds, if you have a cloud hosting package and you wish to upgrade it, it can almost be done instantly. So your server gets additional RAM, CPU cores on the fly. That speeds up time considerably, and it can also help you cost-wise. Let's say you just want a couple of months of upgrade. You can talk with your host provider. Let's say Black Friday is coming and you need to make sure that you can handle the the traffic that comes, because it's much higher than in your average month. So cloud hosting is very flexible, and in terms of pricing, it usually stays around the VPS options, or at least that's what I saw in the latest months. But anyway, it's a great option to have, and if you know that you're going to scale very fast or jump from one point to another very fast in terms of traffic and server resources needs, I would go for the cloud hosting option. The next option is the dedicated hosting option. When we say dedicated, it's exactly what it sounds like. There's a server, there's a machine dedicated to you. This is the most expensive option, the fastest, and also the most secure option. But for a lot of uses, it's overkill. Let me explain myself. Being as expensive as it is, you would need to make sure that your project, be it a store, blog, or whatever, is profitable. Because we're not talking about $20 per month. Usually it's upwards of $150 per month for a dedicated machine. So apart from this, there are other costs that you need to take care of. Being a dedicated machine, you have complete control of the machine. You must take care of everything: the OS, the software, Apache, Nginx, whatever, PHP, and whatever you decide to run on that machine. So you need somebody with experience or an in-house team of developers or sysadmins to take care of all this. That brings in additional costs. Of course, you can delegate these tasks to an outside company, but that will cost also. I mean, nobody's going to do it for free. So this is probably the most expensive option, apart from making your own hosting server in the backyard. And it's most of the times overkill. Of course, there are enterprise scenarios where you need this, but we're talking about a basic web hosting guide for 2020 today. So we're moving on to the next option, reseller hosting. Reseller hosting means that you buy a white label hosting package, then you can divide into multiple packages to resell them. So basically you buy hosting and resell it. You're a reseller of a service. Well, most of the time, most people don't need this. I mean, if you're a blogger, you don't need this. If you're a store owner, you don't need this. These plans are usually made for agencies and creative teams that want to resell hosting as part of their package to their clients. Now, I don't agree with this personally. As an agency owner, I don't think that you should host your store, for example, at the people that developed it. It's not about trust. It's about the level of expertise and the time they can allocate to do this properly. If they're reselling hosting, make sure that they know what they're doing, because if you would just buy yourself the host, you could give them access the same way they have it to your hosting plan so they can do their job, but your server, your website, will be hosted somewhere by people who only do this for a living and nothing else. So they have a lot of time and staff to dedicate to making sure that everything is up to speed. And usually you get a better deal if you think about it, because everybody puts a little bit of markup on things. So buying from a reseller is usually more expensive than buying from the source. That's just how things work. And it's more secure if you ask me. I mean, talking directly to the hosting company is more efficient and speed things up a bit when problems arrive, and sometimes they do arrive. Now, apart from this, what should you know when trying to host something online in 2020? If you ask me, the important thing, if you haven't started, is just to start. Grab the second cheapest option of shared hosting and just go for it. You can upgrade if needed. It's not a problem nowadays. You can literally, your host will probably do it for free in certain scenarios if you upgrade from shared hosting to a VPS or cloud hosting. So that's not an issue. You just need to start and do something. Apart from this, some other information that might prove helpful when trying to buy your first host as a small business owner or as an individual for your blog, your website, your hobby, your project, or whatever. Make sure it's 2020. You need an SSL certificate. So make sure that your hosting provider provides this capability. And probably they will provide a certificate. Now, if you ask me, a good alternative is to make sure that your shared host, your cloud hosting company or whatever, through their cPanel or control panel, allow you to install, or them, if they want to do it for free, Let's Encrypt certificates. These are SSL certificates that are free. So you won't need to spend 10 or 15 bucks a year for it. SSL is very important as it increases security. It matters when talking about SEO, and it's just good to have. Just grab it. I won't bore you with more details. Now, what about DNS, name servers, and other stuff like this that you just saw in instructions on different hosting providers' website? DNS, domain name system, it's a service to help us navigate the internet easily, if you think about it. I mean, each website has an IP address, just like you have a phone address. So remembering IP address would be pretty hard. Here comes DNS. It translates the IP to a domain name. So when you go to example.com, the DNS knows how to translate this to the IP, and it goes to the right website to provide the right content. We need to know this why. Because if you didn't buy your domain from the same company that you're hosting your website on, and you can't do this, there is no problem, your hosting company will require you to change the name servers of your domain. That means then that on the place where you brought your domain from, when you manage that domain in that web portal, control panel, or how would you like to call it, you'll have a couple of fields, usually 4, named name servers. So you just need to copy paste the info you got from your hosting company there. Save and wait about 24 to 72 hours for the changes to propagate, and then your domain will be linked to the server, to the hosting package you just bought. Now, another tip would be try to buy in advance. What do I mean? A lot, I think every host company offers some sort of discount or bonus features when you prepay. When you pay for 6 months, for a year, and even more. Why should you do this? Well, you're just gonna save money. And let's face it, you will not need a host in the next 6 months. I mean, if you want your project to be online, your blog, your store, whatever, you need it all the time. So buying in advance gives you a better deal. Mind you, if you're unsure, you could buy 1 month to test if that host is good, if it's fast or whatever. But after your mind is made up, you should buy for a longer period of time just to save some money. I mean, sometimes it goes as great as if you prepay a hosting plan for 1 year, you could go 2 months free and get a free .com or another top level domain extension for free. That's a pretty great deal. I mean, 2 months free, why not? I'll take that. So that's about it when we're talking about web hosting in 2020. And in regards to what to choose, I purposely left 2 options out. We've talked about them in the beginning. We're talking about WordPress hosting and Magento hosting. WordPress and Magento are 2 popular CMSs. Magento is specialized on e-commerce and WordPress is for websites, blogs, and with WooCommerce or other plugins can be turned easily into a reliable store. Now, the fact that they are so popular made hosting provider companies to make dedicated plans for them. But make sure that you choose them carefully. What do I mean? Let's talk about WordPress. When we talk about WordPress, there are 2 types of WordPress hosting in my opinion. Companies that only do WordPress hosting and they're great at it. I mean, they are just great, they do a good job, but at a price. I mean, they're more expensive than your average shared hoster. But they do the job, so you get what you pay for, as the saying goes. And there are normal hosting companies that sometimes advertise their plans as WordPress hosting. Now, I'm not saying it's a scam, because it's not. A proper hosting company will have some optimizations in place, even if it's a shared hosting package for WordPress. So WordPress could run faster on their servers. That doesn't mean that you can't run Joomla, PrestaShop or whatever you want on them. It just means that they did some optimizations so WordPress would be faster. So if you're using WordPress, WooCommerce or planning to do that, you could and you should take a look at WordPress hosting or even a company that hosts WordPress only. There are companies that only do that and they rock at it. Let's go back to Magento now. Magento is a popular e-commerce software. It's very reliable, very good. It's cool. In a nutshell. The problem comes that I've seen hosting companies that offer Magento hosting, but no dedicated resources. If you're new to this, Magento is a resource hog. It needs some resources in order to work properly. I mean, the recommended resources, the minimum goes to about 2 GB. So if you have no dedicated memory, RAM, well, your performance is gonna vary based, just like I told you in the shared hosting, based on the traffic overall on that server, which you cannot see, cannot control, and to a certain degree even your host cannot control it. So be very careful when choosing a Magento made hosting, and make sure you get dedicated resources. You need dedicated RAM and preferably dedicated CPU. And yes, I've even seen Magento hosting plans that do not offer an SSH connection. So you basically cannot run SSH commands. As a Magento 2 developer, that is bullshit. That's not a Magento plan, that's just random hosting, shared hosting with a fancy orange logo next to it. So be very careful when choosing, but if you're going to Magento, you probably have a lot of budget, and you have some developers to guide you properly. If you know somebody that develops websites or handles stuff like this or is a system administrator, ask them. Preferably ask them to be as honest as they can, as there are quite a few marketing crap or advertisements out there. I hope this long video didn't bore you and you found out some useful stuff, or you could at least get something useful out of my ramblings about what you would need, how to look, what is and what the hell is with all these website hosting options out there. If I can help you anymore, please ask me in the comments and I'll do my best to answer or even make a video about it. Thanks so much for watching. If you've made it this far, don't forget to leave a like to the video, subscribe to the channel, and as usual tell me what you would like to see in the future. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.